Hello everyone, my name is Selena Kipe and I am the Obsessive Quilter and Loving It, and today I'm just going to do a real quick video based on battings and what I use. So first I'm going to show you what a quilt sandwich is. This first quilt is my practice quilt. It's where I practice all my stitching and try out new designs. So you have your quilt top, your patchwork, whatever it is you're doing, your backing, and in this case black, just so I can see what I'm practicing on, and in between you have your batting, and in this case this one's a cotton batting. And we quilt it all up, we trim off the ends, put a nice pretty binding on there, and then the quilt is done. But there's a few different options you can have when you have a quilt, when you make a quilt. So the first one I'll show you is a polyester. Polyester battings are generally more puffy, they have a higher loft. Here's a look at polyester batting. This is a scrap off of a piece, so this is a polyester batting, a typical one. Obviously, there are different brands will have different levels of puffiness, but as you can see, it's not thick. It's not like a comforter. It's not like what you would buy at the store at Walmart or Home Depot or wherever you buy comforters. So it is fairly thin, but what it does is it gives the finished quilt a slightly puffier look. As you can kind of see through some of the stitching on this one, in between the stitching lines, it's a bit more puffy. So, and the same thing in the back, you can see a bit more stitch definition in them. This next one here is also a polyester batting, and this one's not as densely quilted as this one, meaning my stitch lines are a bit further apart, so you can kind of, it looks almost as puffy as the batting itself, right? So that's another way to do it, although I have a tendency to always do fairly dense quilting, as you can see in this section. At some points, this obviously, the denser you quilt, the more flat your quilt is going to be, but it just depends on the look and what you're doing. This quilt here is also a polyester batting. This one was quilted quite far apart. It's probably about as far apart as I generally will go. 1.5 inches to 2 inches is about as far as the stitch lines throughout this quilt. So as you can see already, it just looks that much more puffy with a higher loft, but it really still is only, 1/4 inch, if that. None of these quilts have been washed after they've been made, so as they wash on any quilt, the batting inside will relax and it will grow just a little bit more. Nothing crazy. I'll show you 2 quilts after that have been washed. Another option is wool, and wool also gives a slight bit more definition. Wool batting, this is a piece, is very similar to polyester batting, and it has more of a puff to it. Wool batting is one of the warmest ones, one of the warmest battings you can have in a quilt. It still breathes because it's still a natural fiber. But as you can see from this quilt, it does have a nice loft, a nice puff, which is what I specifically wanted in this quilt to make all the designs, and in this case all the blues, pop up out of the quilt. All the white color has been flattened with some fairly dense quilting. I don't know if you can see that very well, but that was just the way I chose to do this quilt. This next one is also wool, and I wanted to show this one because depending on how you do your stitching, you definitely have it's the illusion of puffiness. It is puffy. In this case with the feathers, they really, in between all the stitching lines, obviously the feathers just get nicely defined, and that's what a lot of quilters will like, is if you want to show off that stitching, you'll use a wool batting. Cotton battings are some of the most common and middle of the line for cost range. Wool is actually one of the more expensive ones. Polyester is actually one of the cheaper types of batting. Cotton is middle of the road. A lot of people like cotton because it's a natural fiber, but it is, generally speaking, the thinnest of them all. As you can see, this is a piece of the batting that was obviously trimmed off of the edge, and it's about 1/8 of an inch. Now they're still warm. A quilt made with cotton batting is still warm, and but it's personal preference. Some people like that really puffy look because that's what we're used to in comforters. But once you've had a quilt that's been made with a nice batting or a good batting, you'll find that a quilt like this or like any of these will be warmer more often than not than a quilt you get, or a blanket or a comforter you would get at the store. So that's what a cotton batting looks like, and the different variations are moderate quilting, so not too close together with the stitches, because the closer you stitch together, the flatter your quilt will get. That's moderate, but as you can still see, it's quite thin. No thicker than, than this, just with a piece of fabric now on the top and the bottom. And again, this has not been washed, but once it gets washed for the first time, inside all the stitching lines will puff out just that little bit more. But again, it won't be drastic. It's not going to totally alter the quilt. This one here is a very sparse stitching or quilting. I've only basically got it around the majority of the squares, and again, you can totally tell it's a pretty flat quilt. This one will have, once washed, more definition to it, because all these areas that are unquilted will puff, but no more than a polyester. It might another 1/8 of an inch, so we might be getting close to a 1/4 inch if we're lucky on something like this. And this quilt is also cotton batting, but densely quilted. This one was meant more for just the stitching, and cotton batting works really, really well for free motion stitching, I find. And it still, as you can see, still shows off the definition of the stitching. And then I've got some straight line, so those are the illusion of a bit more puffy. And then I've got other paisley, swirly shell looking types of stitches. So that's the 3 main bats that I use. I do a fair amount with cotton, and wool has become my new favorite if I want to show off stitching. And polyester, I don't use it as often, but I do use it if needed. I do have some. I keep it for a quick little quilt here and there. And yeah, but I generally, if I'm going to sell a quilt, or if I'm going to spend any length of time on it, I generally will not use a polyester. So that's what quilts look like with the 3 different battings that I use. And to give you an idea of what quilts look like after they've been washed, here is a quilt that I did quite a ways back, and this one's a cotton. This is when I was using basically only cotton. So as you can see, after many, many washings, I've washed this thing probably about 10 times already, you can see all that nice puckering and wrinkly, and it's soft as well. Even with this fairly dense stitching, the quilt is very soft, and as you can see, it's just nice and flowy. And that is what generally a quilt will look like after. Most quilts will look like after you wash them, is they just get that nice, pretty pucker, which is what an old-fashioned quilt looks like. And this is just another one of my earliest quilts, probably within the first 4 months of me starting this craft. And I did a general all over, just kind of like curly cues. There's so many little mistakes on it. But again, as you can see, over washings, it's puckered just that little bit in between the stitching lines. And same thing, cotton batting, which is the thinnest batting you can get, but it does have a slight bit more loft to it. But that's kind of an illusion, because the batting itself is still as thick as it was. It's just now the fabric top, your top quilt, and the backing just kind of puffing away from the center, which gives it that illusion. But it's all really relative to what batting you use and what type you use. So I hope you enjoyed that. I hope that was informative. And please subscribe to my Facebook page, Obsessive Quilter and Loving It, and that's where I post all of my current projects and new things and tips and tricks. And have a great day.